At 64, Nastassja Kinski is finally ready to speak the words Hollywood never wanted to hear. The 5 people she says wounded her the most. For a decade, she was cinema's rarest spell, the face on billboards and the ghost in directors' dreams. The European ingenue who made Los Angeles feel haunted and glamorous at the same time. But the glow was never just glow. It was heat, and the heat burned. Behind the posters for Tess, Cat People, and Paris, Texas lived a young woman navigating rooms where power wore a smile and called itself art. She learned early that beauty could open every door, and just as quickly that it could lock her inside. Tonight, she does not promise revenge. She promises truth. She promises names. Mentors who allegedly blurred boundaries. Lovers who allegedly turned control into care. A studio machine that lifted her up and, when the headlines stopped selling, watched her fall. "I didn't disappear," she says in a voice that has outlived the gossip. "I walked away from the people who thought they owned me." 5 betrayals, 5 lessons, and 1 woman who will finally decide what her story means. Born Nastassja Kinski on the 24th of January, 1961, in West Berlin, she was the daughter of acclaimed and notoriously volatile German actor Klaus Kinski. Her childhood was anything but idyllic. The family's cramped apartment was filled with constant turbulence, a mix of artistic chaos and emotional instability. At just 13, she was cast in her first film, Falsche Bewegung, her ethereal looks catching the attention of European filmmakers who saw her as the next great cinematic muse. By the late 1972, her career was in full bloom. Roman Polanski's Tess, 1979, propelled her to international fame, earning a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer. Hollywood embraced her as the exotic European ingenue, sophisticated, untouchable, and irresistibly marketable. She moved effortlessly between art house projects and high-profile studio films, starring in Cat People, 1982, and Paris, Texas, 1984, cementing her status as both a critical darling and a commercial draw. But beneath the accolades, the pressures were suffocating. As a teenager in an adult industry, she navigated a minefield of male-dominated sets where mentorship often blurred into exploitation. She worked tirelessly, often shooting back-to-back films, sacrificing her own personal life for the demands of fame. Publicly, she was the mysterious beauty. Privately, she grappled with isolation, trust issues, and the unspoken knowledge that her image was as much a commodity as her talent. In interviews, she would later hint at the personal cost of her ascent. "They didn't just want me in their movies," she once said. "They wanted me in their lives, in their control." Hollywood, and the men who dominated it, had given her everything except the freedom to truly own her own story. When Nastassja Kinski first met Roman Polanski, she was barely out of childhood, wide-eyed, eager, and already carrying the weight of being Klaus Kinski's daughter. Polanski was at the height of his artistic powers, the kind of director whose call could catapult an actor into global stardom. He offered her Tess, a lush adaptation of Thomas Hardy's novel, and on the surface, it was a dream. France, couture costumes, glowing cinematography, and the full machinery of a prestige production behind her. But dreams have shadows. On set, the lines between professional guidance and personal intrusion blurred. Polanski presented himself as the genius mentor, the man who understood her better than anyone else, yet there were moments, late-night script rehearsals in his hotel suite, lingering physical closeness under the guise of getting into character, that felt wrong even then. She was still a teenager, new to the industry's games, and the power imbalance was immense. Rumors swirled in the European press about the nature of their relationship, whispers that followed her for years, and colored how producers, co-stars, and even journalists approached her. The very film that won her international acclaim also tied her name to a scandal she never fully controlled. "It's hard to know when someone is shaping your career," she would later reflect, "and when they're shaping you for themselves." The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Polanski had secured her trust, her vulnerability, and then left her to navigate the fallout alone. When questions arose, he deflected. When the rumors grew, he remained silent. She was left to carry both the triumph of Tess and the toxic baggage that came with it. In the years that followed, Kinski learned an early, brutal lesson. In Hollywood, the man who opens the door for you can also be the one to slam it shut and lock you inside. To the outside world, being the daughter of Klaus Kinski seemed like an advantage. He was one of Europe's most infamous actors, a man whose collaborations with Werner Herzog had made him a cult legend. In truth, Nastassja's relationship with her father was a storm that never cleared. Klaus was volatile, magnetic, and deeply unpredictable. His temper could turn a family gathering into a battlefield in seconds. When she began to rise in Hollywood, Klaus claimed public pride, telling interviewers how his daughter had inherited his genius. But behind closed doors, he often weaponized her success, demanding credit for her achievements and belittling her choices if they didn't align with his own artistic tastes. "You'll never be more than a pretty face unless you listen to me," he once told her during a tense dinner in Los Angeles, his voice dripping with the same theatrical venom that made him famous on screen. There were deeper wounds, too uncomfortable stories Nastassja would later hint at, but never fully detail, the kind that blurred the line between family loyalty and personal trauma. She described feeling used as an extension of his ego, paraded at events not as his daughter but as proof of his virility, his legacy. The most cutting moment came when she landed a major role opposite a celebrated American actor. Klaus, instead of congratulating her, publicly dismissed the film as a joke and told the press he had taught her everything she knows, but she still refuses to learn. The headline became a shadow she couldn't escape, undermining her credibility at a critical point in her career. This wasn't just paternal criticism, it was a calculated strike. Klaus knew his name carried weight, and his words could shape how Hollywood saw her. For Nastassja, it was the realization that sometimes the person who should protect you most is the one who sharpens the blade. "I never wanted to be my father's shadow," she later admitted. "But he wouldn't let me be my own light." Working alongside Jack Nicholson in the early 1982nd was supposed to be a career-defining moment for Nastassja Kinski. He was Hollywood royalty, a man whose charisma could electrify a set and whose box office draw was unmatched. When they were cast together, industry insiders whispered about the perfect pairing, his established gravitas balancing her rising star power. At first, Nicholson played the charming collaborator. On set, he lavished her with attention, cracking jokes between takes, offering seasoned advice about navigating the business. But that charm, Nastassja would learn, could turn sharp. Off camera, he began feeding stories to friendly journalists, little tidbits about her supposed eccentric behavior, her moody temperament. The press lapped it up, and soon the narrative around her shifted from mysterious and alluring to difficult and unpredictable. The betrayal came into full view during a high-profile press tour. In a live television interview, Nicholson was asked about working with her. Instead of praise, he smirked and said, "She's unique. You just never know which Nastassja you'll get." The audience laughed. She sat there, frozen, realizing he had just branded her with the most dangerous label for any actress in Hollywood: unreliable. The fallout was swift. Offers slowed, and some producers hesitated to cast her, citing compatibility concerns without ever specifying what they meant. The irony was bitter. Nicholson's own unpredictable behavior was legendary, but in a male-dominated industry, his antics were celebrated while hers were pathologized. Years later, she would describe the experience without naming him directly. "Some people pretend to be your ally while they're quietly setting the stage for your downfall." For Nastassja, that stage had been lit by a man the world adored, leaving her in the shadows of a reputation she didn't earn. In the cutthroat theater of Hollywood politics, a smile could be a weapon, and she had just learned how devastating that weapon could be. When David Lynch approached Nastassja Kinski in the mid-1982nd, it felt like destiny. His surreal, dreamlike world seemed tailor-made for her haunting screen presence. He spoke of a role that would redefine her career, an enigmatic lead in a film that would blend high art with mass appeal. Over coffee meetings in Los Angeles, he sketched out scenes, promised creative freedom, and assured her she was the only one who could bring this character to life. For weeks, she rearranged her schedule, turned down other offers, and immersed herself in Lynch's peculiar vision. She studied his storyboards, experimented with costumes, even began training in specific physical movements to match his concept. The production was slated to begin in early spring. Then, without warning, The calls stopped. When she finally reached him, he was vague, something about financing delays, maybe a new direction for the script. Days later, she learned from the trades that the film was moving forward with another actress in the role, one who just happened to be the current darling of the indie circuit. No call, no explanation, just a quiet replacement. Industry insiders whispered that Lynch had been pressured by producers who found Kinski too controversial after the recent media gossip. Others suggested he simply used her name to generate early buzz before locking in his preferred choice. Either way, the betrayal cut deep, not just for the lost role, but for the breach of trust. The role went on to receive critical acclaim, and the actress who took it won awards. Kinski stayed silent publicly, but in private, she described the experience as being erased from a story I helped build. It wasn't just professional loss. It was a reminder that in Hollywood, promises were currency, and they could be devalued overnight. The lesson was as bitter as it was clear. In an industry built on dreams, the dream makers could disappear before the first frame was ever shot. When Nastassja Kinski met Mick Jagger in the late 1982nd, she was no longer the ingenue. She had lived through enough of Hollywood's double-edged promises to recognize the signs of a charmer, but Jagger was different, or so she thought. He was already a rock and roll legend. His life a swirl of music, luxury, and irresistible magnetism. Their connection was instant, electric, and for a time, she let herself believe she had found someone who saw her as more than a role to be cast or a headline to be written. In private, he was attentive and disarmingly open. He spoke about the loneliness of fame, the burden of constant public scrutiny pains she understood all too well. They traveled together, slipped into each other's worlds, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life that didn't revolve around scripts, casting calls, or the politics of producers' rooms. But Jagger's world was never built for exclusivity. While she was filming overseas, she began to hear the whispers paparazzi snapshots of him with other women, rumors of flings that he never bothered to deny. When she confronted him, he shrugged, his voice casual. "You know how it is. This is just the life." The real wound, however, wasn't the affairs. It was how he used their relationship to keep his own name in the gossip columns. Friends told her about staged photo ops, leaks to the press about his latest conquest, even casual brags in interviews that reduced her to a trophy in his long line of romantic escapades. Overnight, her public identity shifted from accomplished actress to Mick Jagger's girlfriend, and every headline seemed to frame her as a supporting character in his story. The final break came during a high-profile charity event in London. They had agreed to walk the red carpet together, but at the last moment, he chose to arrive with a different date, a young model whose presence guaranteed fresh headlines. Nastassja arrived alone, cameras flashing. The question on every reporter's lips the same. "Where's Mick?" She never gave them an answer. Inside, she smiled, posed for the photographers, and delivered her speeches as if nothing had happened. But in that moment, something inside her shifted permanently. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was an erasure of her identity, a theft of the narrative she had fought so hard to reclaim. "I learned then," she would later say, "that some people don't love you. They love what you do for their reflection." By the time the last betrayal faded into memory, Nastassja Kinski had already transformed. The young girl plucked from Berlin's streets had been celebrated, commodified, doubted, and discarded by some of the most powerful men in entertainment. Each betrayal left its mark, but together they carved out a truth she could finally claim as her own. She was no one's possession, no one's conquest, no one's project to mold. The years away from Hollywood's spotlight weren't a retreat, they were an act of reclamation. She worked on her own terms, choosing projects for their meaning rather than their marketability, and learned to live beyond the reach of those who saw her as a means to their end. There was freedom in anonymity, and there was power in saying no. Speaking now, her voice is steady, unflinching. "I don't tell these stories for revenge," she says. "I tell them because they belong to me. They were taken once, twisted into headlines, into gossip, into myths. I am taking them back." In that clarity lies her final victory. She forgave herself for believing in false promises, for loving the wrong people, for staying silent when she should have spoken. But the name she carries, those who saw her as an object, an accessory, a stepping stone, she has no intention of forgiving. "I forgave myself," she says, "but not them." Which of these 5 betrayals shocked you the most? Was it the mentor who blurred every boundary? The father who turned pride into a weapon? The co-star who poisoned her reputation? The director who erased her from her own role? Or the lover who made her a headline instead of a partner? If Nastassja Kinski's story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, because behind every public scandal is a private truth, and voices like yours help keep those truths alive. Like this video if you believe in telling the real stories behind Hollywood's glittering facade. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode, where we reveal the one woman she feared more than anyone, and why that fear never truly left her.